came about 4 years ago to help start the robotics practice here. Here in the US, we're not quick to adopt new technologies oftentimes. Robots in restaurants. It's not uncommon to look at the vast majority of Americans in the US have never seen a robot in person. The things that robots are really good at. Dirty, dull, and dangerous. I wouldn't call it dull hanging off the side of a skyscraper, but dirty and
Yeah.
dangerous certainly. We've been able to reduce those on demand, those break fix calls by 93%. By doing preventative maintenance. A big part of our program, and that's why we say no robot left behind, is that we constantly don't be afraid of it any more than you're afraid. It's there as a tool. There's so many things that we do today on these mobile devices
Yeah.
that we never could do in the past. Embrace the technology. It's inevitable, and so embrace it.
Welcome to the New World Podcast, where we delve into the ever changing and accelerating pace of global change and its impact on our lives. I'm your host, John Paul Flores, broadcasting live from the New World Studio. Today, we're diving into the world of AI and automation. As an enthusiast and expert in lead generation, I will guide you through understanding and leveraging these technologies for your business and for your personal use. And don't forget, AI and automation might be unstoppable forces, but that doesn't mean you are powerless. Tune in to learn how to make them work for you and not the other way around. But first, let's meet our guest. Welcome to the New World Podcast, where we navigate the changing world around us. I'm your host, John Paul Flores, specializing in lead generation and AI automation, here to help you understand how our world is changing and what it means for you. In this episode, we have Dale Walsh, founder of RoboWorks, a leader in robotic fleet management. Dale shares his journey in building a robotic management company, the common misconceptions people have about automation and robotic fleets, and the mistakes businesses often make when adopting robotic fleets into their business. Dale, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. By the way, before we begin on the
Thank you,
in-depth
John. It's a
questions,
pleasure to
because I do
chat
have
with you
some, do you
today.
mind giving us a quick intro on who Dale is, what's your experiences, expertise, and what keeps you busy these days?
Sure, I'll be glad to. So, where to start? Well, I was with Ricoh, a big Japanese technology company for 28 years. And my last several years there, probably the last 8 to 10 or so, was in third-party technology support and primarily in robotic support. I came over to our parent company, which is called ARO, about 4 years ago to help start the robotics practice here. But to do things a little bit different. So RoboWorks is a an agnostic service provider. So we install, we maintain, and we repair robots for different robot manufacturers. But we focus heavily on preventative maintenance, which we feel is the key to maximizing uptime for the end customer. So you're when you do have downtime, it's scheduled, it's not unscheduled, and we feel like that's really important to the end user. So been in the robotics support space now for 10, 12 years, something in that neighborhood, and worked with a variety of robot manufacturers all over the world, and supporting their
That's
robots,
amazing.
installing their
Do you
robots,
have any
maintaining them, and
experiences when
repairing
you
them.
were young that initially draw you that said, I want to do robotics because of this thing?
Yeah, my whole career has been around automation and innovation. So I've always looked at how to automate manual tasks. That's always been a focus of mine in my career. And so robotics was a natural extension of that. Of course, growing up, was a sci-fi fan, like many of us in the robotic space. So, robots were something that was always interesting, whether it was professionally or personally. But the promise of automation technologies
You know, some
like
people would,
robotics has always
especially
fascinated me.
in your kind of industry, some of them might focus on just installing these robots and just going away because the money might be bigger on just the installing part of things. Why focus on
Yep.
also helping these robots be managed correctly?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's robotic adoption is different in different parts of the world. And here in the US, we're not quick to adopt new technologies oftentimes. And that's especially true of robotics because of the negative implications of, robotics, or the thought that robotics could be taking someone's job. Personally, I don't feel like that's the case. I think robots are creating new types of jobs, and robots are, helping move forward. If you go back and take the long view, this all started with Gutenberg back in the 1400s when he invented the printing press, right? and and literally changed the world. Made it where the common people could have access to what only the elite had had before, and that was the ability to have books, and read and learn. And so that literally changed the world. But there's all kind. I mean, obviously, the internet has had a huge impact on us. There's, cell phones, mobile devices, all of these things, and robotics are just another example of those technologies. So we will adapt, over time to these. In the short term, certainly, some people will, lose jobs because of automation technologies. But really, these robots, for the most part, are filling jobs that employers can't hire people for. So that's part of it, right? Is that adoption. And so there's a lot more hand holding now in other parts of the world. In Asia, for example, where kids grow up with robotics, it's a natural thing to accept. In Japan, China, Singapore, South Korea, it's a natural thing to accept those robotic technologies as part of your life. Here in the US, we're not to that point yet. So there is a certain amount of hand holding that needs to be done, uh, to make sure that adoption is successful, and that's something that we do. Of course, the robots have to work as well. That's kind of the table stakes these days, that the robot has to work. So, the installation is important, and as I mentioned earlier, the preventative maintenance piece we feel is very important, because nobody's going to adopt it if it doesn't work right. But even if it does work right, there's still a significant amount of hand holding and retraining. Obviously, robots are going into high turnover environments as well. So there's always a need for retraining. And often they're going into dynamic environments that are changing. And if you don't adapt to those changes in that environment, next thing you know, the robot's not going to be utilized as it
You
should
know, you
be,
said
or
most of
maybe even
the
not
robotics
utilized at
are currently
all and
adapted
find it
to
in the corner.
Asia. Do you mind letting us know what the jobs of the robots are currently doing in Asia compared to the jobs that they're doing here in the US?
I think you'll see the jobs are
Yeah,
similar. Things like, obviously manufacturing. The more industrial side, the more mature side,
yeah,
but the more
yeah,
evolving side, and that's relatively stable. Of course, collaborative robots have changed that environment and and made, automation possible for people beyond large manufacturers. So there's that piece of it. But the thing that we're seeing more of today, and I think this is true really around the world, are those manual tasks. Cleaning has been growing rapidly. Whether that's a robot that's a vacuum or a scrubber or a combination of the two, hard surfaces as well as soft surfaces, carpet, etc. That's a quickly growing area. Food service, is another one, and food service is both front of house and back of house. So robots that deliver from the kitchen, to the tables, and then are used when bussing the tables to send those dirty dishes back to the kitchen. But also in the kitchen itself, right? The actual food preparation, whether it's a pizza robot that's building pizzas at high volume in production, or whether it's a fryer or some other instrument in the kitchen or tool in the kitchen that's being automated. So, front of house, back of house, delivery, both sidewalk delivery, sometimes even road delivery, with small autonomous vehicles, AMRs, but operating in public spaces. We have to remember too that those of us that are in the robotic space, we see robots, we talk about robots, we live robots every day. The vast majority of Americans in the US where we provide support have never seen a robot in person, right? I mean, you've seen them on TV, you've read about them, but you may not have actually seen one in
You know,
person.
the
So
robots that I
there's
find
still
more
a large
exciting
learning curve
are
here for the
those
public.
autonomous flying robots or planes, drones that they're using to send these vials of medicine to the hospitals that are very far away. I think when we start using and coming up with
Yes,
ideas that generally help people in such a way that we usually don't have the capabilities to do so, I think that's the best way to use them.
absolutely. Yeah, and we're active in that space as well, supporting drone boxes, which are pre-deployed places for the drones to live. I mean, you'll never realize the true value of an autonomous drone when you have an operator, right? When there's somebody has to be controlling it, somebody has to be looking at it. But when they can be truly fully autonomous and pre-deployed out where they're actually needed, whether that's for emergency services or delivery, like you mentioned, of medical supplies or blood samples or those type of things. That has, for that to truly work well, it has to be fully autonomous without human intervention. So we focused on maintaining the technology that helps support that, primarily
Especially because most
drone
of those
boxes,
things that are being
where the drone lives
transported
when it's not
via
flying.
those drones are generally highly volatile and generally priceless. So I think the fact that we need to remove the human error before we actually
Yes.
commercialize is the way to go.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's you never know when traffic's gonna hit, and
Yeah,
manual couriers, whether they're on a bicycle or vehicle, whatever, that are moving these
yeah,
goods today, in the air, it's predictable. You know how long it's going to take to get from
yeah.
point A to point B. In a major city, you don't always know how long it's going to take you to get that timely blood sample or whatever it is that you're transporting, that important medication. You don't know how long it's going to take to get from point A to point B because of traffic and
RoboWorks
other.
emphasizes point
By
that
the air, you
we
do.
should never leaving a robot behind. Can you talk more about that?
Absolutely, yeah. That's a tagline for us. And what we really mean by that is we think of robots as autonomous employees. We don't think about robots as just another technology. We actually treat them and think about them as if they're employees and need to be managed as if they're employees, right? And you need to manage their coworkers, whether that be another robot coworker or whether that be human coworkers. All of that needs to be managed, and left to their own devices, humans take the path of least resistance. So I'll give you a great example. Let's talk about restaurant robots in restaurants, right? Which we're seeing more and more of, front of house, making those deliveries, because a lot of times restaurants just can't hire enough wait staff to take care of their customers, right? So they're starting to use robots to supplement that. And initially, there may be some concern from the employees, of course, and that's part of our training when we're doing installation, is not only train them how to use it, but the value that this robot brings to them, right? I mean, if you don't have to carry that big tray of drinks anymore, because now the robot can do that. If you're not having to carry those heavy bins of dirty dishes, back to the kitchen, because the robot can take care of that. That gives those end users, or excuse me, those wait staff, more time to spend with their customers, right? The end customer gets a better experience. One, there's the novelty of it, which is great, of having a robot bring your food to you. But instead of my waiter or my waitress constantly running back to the kitchen, they can concentrate on making sure my drink is full, or those type of things. So ultimately, it ends up being a better experience. But if you don't keep up with that. So if you put it in, great, it's working great, train the staff, everything's working well. Well, a few months later, now
Yeah.
you take all the tables and all the chairs out of the restaurant so you can clean the floors, and
Yeah.
and and then you put them all back in, and they don't necessarily all go to the in the exact same spot they were when that robot was programmed, 6
Yeah.
months ago. So, now it doesn't go to table 6 like it used to. So
Yeah.
the wait staff just says, okay, well, we'll stop sending it to table 6. We'll
Yeah.
just deliver manually to table 6. They never pick up the phone and call the manufacturer or the
Yeah.
reseller and say, hey, there's a
Yeah.
problem. They just do their workarounds, right? Human nature again. You get the job done. Well, now, soon it's not
Yeah.
only table 6, it's table 12, and it's table 3. And over time, next thing you know, the robot's pushed over in the corner
Yeah.
and they've just stopped using it. Not because it's broken, not because it's not doing what it's supposed to do
Yeah.
electromechanically, it's just not doing what they need it to do. So a big part of our program, and that's why we say no robot left behind, is that we constantly adjust and tweak. We talk to the end customers. When we go on site to do a preventative maintenance,
Yeah.
we not only do what the
Yeah.
manufacturer specifies from an electromechanical standpoint that needs to be done,
Yeah.
lubrication or cleaning or whatever it is, replacing certain parts, filters, etc. We do those electromechanical things, but we also meet with the end users, not just the management, but the actual people who are using the robots. And we'll generally hear something from them like, yeah, the robot's great, except, right? And then we want to dig into that except and figure out what that is. So early on, we can make those adjustments and tweaks. And that's how we feel like this really helps robot adoption, is by making sure that that robot is not only working correctly, but doing what they need it to
Yeah.
do, the end customers need it to do. And that's a
You know,
big
I
change
bet
from
when the
just
computer first
dropping a
come in
robot
the
in and moving
offices, a
on to
lot
the
of
next one.
people also says, yeah, the computer is great. Yeah, the printer is great, but it's just too confusing to use.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I'm old enough to remember that transition from I was in working in legal space at that time, and when the legal secretaries were
Yeah.
transitioning from Wang word processors and typewriters
Yeah.
to Windows-based PCs, it was a painful
But as
transition.
you will
You are
notice, most
absolutely
of the
right. It was
innovations that
absolutely a
actually
painful
caught on
transition.
and got innovated much more are the innovations that we said, this is confusing and I need help.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's exactly what we've built our program, is to provide that help,
Yeah.
whether that's electromechanically or training or fine tuning
So when
adjustments,
a
tweaks,
company have one
constant
of these robots
updates
and they need to
to
ask a
the
question, maybe a
systems.
support call, they call you.
Yes, so our
Yeah.
customer is primarily OEMs, so the manufacturer of the robots. Sometimes a reseller, a large reseller who's has a
Yeah.
large geography to sell to. Sometimes it's an integrator. So most of our customers are that side of the
Yeah.
house, on essentially the sales side, not so much the consumer. Now, ultimately, that's the customer of our customer, and we want to make sure that they are happy and they are
Yeah.
getting that return on investment that they expected out of their investment in robotics. So our our our
Yeah.
customer, the one who writes us a check every month, is probably not the end
Yeah.
customer. It's not in this case that we were just talking. It's not the restaurant owner. It's the company who sold the robot to the restaurant owner or who
Yeah.
made the robot. But yes, ultimately,
I
that's
think
who
my question on that is
we're
how
trying
much
to
of
take
the
care of,
people who
is that
calls you
end
that they have a
customer.
problem on the robot is actually just a human error.
A large percentage. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I'll be honest with you.
absolutely.
Today, robots are pretty reliable electromechanically. Most of the robots that are coming to market are pretty good from an
Yeah,
electromechanical standpoint. Now, they certainly need some preventative maintenance, and the environment that it's going
yeah,
into can have a dramatic effect on how well the robot works. Right. So, if it's a restaurant that's has a lot of, let's say, grease in the kitchen on the floor and things like that, that can cause issues. If it's an environment that's all carpet, picking up fibers out of the carpet, that can cause issues. We have in the warehouse space, we've had a customer that
yeah,
the robot's removing a lot of
yeah,
apparel. And so there's a significant amount of cotton dust in the air on the floor that gets sucked into the robots, gets wrapped around the axles, all those kind of things. So environment can certainly play a big impact on
yeah,
how well a robot performs in that case. But to answer your question, I would
yeah.
say at least 75% of the calls we get are training or human error
I
issues
think one of the
versus
most common
actual
misconception about
electromechanical
robot
issues with the
is
robot.
of that people have is they like to associate the word robot with something sci-fi, something that is far from today in the future. But I think you should let the people know about kind of current use cases
Right.
that has been going on for decades now of these robots.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, and you're right, and that goes back to what we talked about earlier, where most people, at least in the U.S., have never actually seen a robot in person. Now that's starting to change when you start seeing a robot inside of Walmart. That starts to change, right? People are now starting to see these in public, or you see a security robot at the mall, or patrolling the parking lot at the airport. So it is changing, and people are starting to see those things, or a restaurant where a robot's delivering their pizza to them. So that is starting to change, but it's going to take time. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, obviously, the industrial side is the most mature
yeah,
place. Manufacturing was one of those early adopters of robotic technology. So whether that's everything from small items on up to
yeah,
automobiles and even much larger that are manufactured by robot. But in more public spaces, we see
yeah,
robots, as I mentioned earlier, in restaurants, in hotels, casinos, ports, all
yeah.
types of different environments where they are interacting with the public, and people are starting to
Yeah.
to see those
I think
robots
one of
in
the
public
things that
places
other
and
business
starting
owners
to
also
interact with
think
them.
when they're trying to integrate robots in their company is that maybe the robot will break easily. Maybe, it would cost a lot of money to maintain it because this is a new technology. But in my opinion, if a company is just starting out, pumping out these robots, they're going to be using the finest materials there is. Yeah,
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, robots are pretty robust today. Now, they still do need maintenance. It's like anything else. It's like your car, right? You can't expect to never, no matter how good of a car you bought, can't expect to never need to do an oil change or rotate your tires, right? You still have maintenance that you need to do, no matter how well it's made. And robots are no different in that case. But it's not as expensive as people might think to maintain it, and that's why companies like us are focusing in on doing that maintenance. But it does need to be done. Sometimes a robot manufacturer will expect the end customer to do that maintenance. Instead of having a representative of manufacturer do it. In reality, most of the time that doesn't happen. It ends up, the preventative maintenance is always kind of at the bottom of the priority list. There's always something else more important. So oftentimes that doesn't get done. And then that's when we have to
What's
step
funny
in
about
and
what you said that
bring the
most of the
robots
time
back up to speed,
manufacturers
so to speak.
expect the owner of the robot to actually maintain it is that look, we're in a society where if we need our air condition cleaned, we call an HVAC company. And imagine how simple an air conditioning looks like if you compare it to
Exactly.
a system of a robot. Just fast.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when I was growing up, everybody did maintenance on your own cars, right, as well. But you look under the hood of a
Yeah.
modern vehicle, and most of the time you can't even tell there's an engine in there somewhere, right? I mean, it's buried so deep. So, yeah, it's the same thing. We go to mechanics, we call in professionals, and the same thing is true for robots. Yeah,
Yeah.
you do want somebody who focuses in that space and knows what they're doing. For us, that's all we do is
Can you
support
talk more
robots. We
about
don't
your
do any other
preventive
technologies
maintenance? Why
other
do
than
you think
supporting
that is
robots.
more important than the other type of maintenance, or just fixing the robot when it breaks?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when a robot breaks unexpectedly, it generally means unexpected downtime, right? So let's just keep with that robot in the restaurant, right? So I've built my staff at my restaurant to have, let's say, five wait staff and three robots. And now one of my robots has gone down unexpectedly. So somebody's got to pick up that extra slack, right? Now, whether that's, the customers just don't get their food as quickly as they should, or, people are having to work extra hard. So, it negatively impacts the staff when that robot is goes down. On the other hand, if you're talking about preventative maintenance, one, it's scheduled in advance. The restaurant knows when we're coming. They can adjust their staffing. We're gonna take an hour on each of these three robots, and we're going to do the preventative maintenance on them. And so they know they can adjust their scheduling in advance to accommodate that. So you end up with, instead of people scrambling to try to react, and then having a robot down for whatever period of time it takes for a technician to get on site and parts to come in and those things. Instead, we're scheduling these things in advance. We're maintaining them. We're looking at all those parts and seeing if something needs to be replaced before it breaks, so that we can do this on a scheduled basis versus a reactionary basis. And we've been able to prove that out. We have one customer, all mostly autonomous mobile robots that are moving around environments, a lot of restaurants, hotels, casinos, etc., as well as other environments. They did not have a preventative maintenance program when we started working with them. They were just doing reactive. And by putting a preventative maintenance program in place, we've been able to reduce those on demand, those break fix calls by 93%, by doing preventative maintenance. So, the manufacturers happier because they're not having to answer the phone and talk to an unhappy customer. The customers are happier because they have a robot that is, higher uptime and working more frequently. And yes, you got to do maintenance, but it's scheduled versus just the robot going down when you least expect it. And everybody, it wins. It's really a win-win for
Can you
everybody
talk
because
about the
of
lifetime of a
the
robot
increased
that is
uptime for the
maintained
robots.
versus one that is not regularly maintained? How long do these typically last? Yeah.
I would, I would say most robots, we're looking at the 3 to 5 year lifespan in most cases. Now that will vary, depending on the environment that it's going into. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, that environment with a lot of cotton dust, that can decrease the lifespan of the robots. Yes, you can clean them, but and lubricate them and all those things, but those kind of environments can decrease the life. But I would say, on general, we're looking 3 to 5 years on most robots. By then, the technology has probably changed more than the fact that the robot needs to be replaced. It's more keeping up with the latest technology than it
I think
is
one of the most common
replacing it because
questions
it's
that
not working
business
any
owners
longer.
have that probably hinders them from calling a company that have one of these robots is that maybe it would cost a lot to buy one. Yeah.
Yeah, and that used to be the case,
Yeah.
but we've seen over the last several years, the prices on robotics come down dramatically. I'm in the business, and sometimes I'm surprised at how inexpensive, some commercially available robots are today. So yeah, the prices come down. Components, prices for components like lidar. that used to be very expensive have come down dramatically. And we're seeing kind of this perfect storm, right, of lowering price of components, lowering prices of the robotics themselves, along with an increasing minimum wage and an increasing or a decreasing workforce, actually, where there's just not as many people to fill the jobs that are out there. I heard a statistic recently here in the U.S. that, if every unemployed person in the U.S. found a job, there would still be millions of job openings, and so something has to be done to fill
In
those
terms of, I,
roles.
I
And
really just
robotics
want
is
to
is
know
one of
how
those
much
things.
a robot would cost. I'm just really curious. Let's say a robot that serves food, maybe get the food from the kitchen to the customer. How much would a robot like that typically ranges for?
Yeah, I mean, I'll not being a reseller yourself, I'm just going to give you a off the top of my head opinion. But I would say in most cases you're looking at somewhere between ten to $25,000, depending on the capabilities and the technology that's built into those robots. It's a pretty broad range, and some are far more sophisticated than others, electromechanically. But yeah, it's well within um, most restaurants or most
Yeah,
businesses to be able to look at purchasing robots, whether that's a delivery robot, a floor cleaning robot,
that's very
or
affordable
other types
compared
of
to how much salary
automation
costs.
technologies.
Yeah,
Yeah, when you look at a true labor cost, and oftentimes people
yeah.
don't look at their true costs. They look at, okay, what's the hourly rate times,
You have to manage that.
40 hours. Well,
Yeah,
that's not really your true cost. I mean,
emotional
you've got
cost.
benefit. Yeah, you
Yeah,
got to manage these people. Exactly. You got to train them. You got to hire them. You've got to rehire when they turn over.
yeah,
Right. So, it's not uncommon to look at, a 40% or more, benefit load, plus overhead, for those employees. So when you start looking
yeah,
at your true cost of employees, robots can make a lot of sense.
yeah,
And like I said, it's not even the taking jobs. It's those jobs that you've budgeted for, that
yeah,
you have, and you can't fill. Whether that's in a warehouse, a distribution center, a restaurant, manufacturing,
yeah.
wherever it may be.
And
There's
sometimes
millions
the
of open
employers just
jobs that
doesn't
employers
have the
just can't
capabilities to
fill
actually
today.
hire someone. And can you talk more about what industries you think would be
Yeah.
beneficial to, if you're in this industry or business, why you should look into robotics, and what type of robots do you think you can have for your company?
Sure. I think that it's the three Ds, right? The things that robots are really good at: dirty, dull, and dangerous. And sometimes you see applications for all three of those, right? Whether that's transporting something that's heavy, and saving wear and tear on people's backs. We're seeing we have a partner who's placing robots into car dealerships, and they're moving tires and they're moving parts, that are heavy. So that the mechanics don't have to do that. So that's really helping out on potentially reducing on injuries, um, to employees. So any of those, anything that fits into that dirty, dull, and dangerous, are potential areas for robots. I mean, it's surprising all the different areas that we're seeing robots in today. Maybe even to the point of being window washers on scrapers. That's a very specialized
Yeah,
skill set, but now robots are starting to do that type of work as well. Obviously, that is very much a dirty and dangerous. I wouldn't call it dull, hanging off the side of a skyscraper, but dirty and
yeah,
dangerous certainly. But any job like that, and again, those are specialized jobs that take a lot of training, et cetera. So
yeah,
um, any kind of environment, the
yeah,
cleaning space is one of those we're seeing a lot of robot adoption in the cleaning space. delivery, another one that we're seeing
What
a lot of about.
industries
Yeah,
or
like I said,
generally
food
just type of
service,
people
etc.
do you think should avoid getting robots for their?
Oh, that's a great question. Let me think about that one for a second. Who should avoid robots? Wow, that's I
Yeah,
my initial thought would say I don't think anybody should avoid robots. I guess the
yeah,
if you're not willing to maintain it,
yeah,
or have someone do the maintenance on it, maybe you shouldn't invest in robotics. And that's not just true of robots. That's really
yeah.
true of any technology, right? If you're not going to keep your iPhone updated, maybe you shouldn't do that either. If you're not going to change the oil in your car, maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you shouldn't have a car if you're not going to maintain it. So I would say really that's the only people I can think of off the top of my head that are maybe shouldn't look at robotic technologies if they're just not willing to make the
RoboWorks
investment in
covers
maintaining it after
most
you
of
make
the
the purchase.
states that we have. I think 48. Correct me if I'm wrong. How do you manage to deliver that much range
Yes.
in terms of
Yep.
in terms of locations while you're still operating your company as a digital? Yeah,
Yeah, so we look at the density of robots as we grow our business. We're still workforce. But we look at the density, the population of robots, and then we'll begin to play. As we see density growing, or population of robots in certain geographies growing, we'll place text into those environments or geographies. So we have robots in major metropolitan areas all across the country. We also have robots that we support in the middle of Montana, right? So where there's not a lot of robots. So sometimes we do have to travel someone there, but that's okay. We're fine with doing that. And you're right, built our program to cover the entire continental U.S. We're not doing Alaska and Hawaii yet, but maybe one day we will as well as those populations of robots continue
yeah,
to grow. And then, of course, as we look to move outside the country as well, as populations of robots grow. So
yeah.
it's a steady growth,
No,
as we
I
bring on new
think
partners
you're
and new
gonna expand
robots
to
in
Hawaii when
different
you decide
geographies.
to live in Hawaii for a while. In terms
Well,
of
I'll volunteer
re-education,
to go
because
do
I
that.
believe you don't
Absolutely.
just need to educate your customers once for these products for robots. How often do you need to re-educate them?
Absolutely. Yeah. So most of our robotic partners, we do
Yeah,
quarterly preventative maintenance. We have some where we do more frequently, for instance, monthly. We have some that we do semi-annually or even
yeah,
annually. But most of our partners fall within that quarterly preventative maintenance.
yeah,
So we're going on site, every 3 months. We're doing the electromechanical work on the robots. And you're
yeah,
absolutely right. Training is it
yeah,
needs to be a constant part of that. So that's part of what we do during that visit. Sometimes that's retraining existing staff. Oftentimes that's training new staff who came in since the
yeah,
last training, because these are robots are going into
yeah,
heights, where the staff changes constantly. So yeah, so it is. We're doing that generally on a quarterly basis. We're retraining staff and training new staff
yeah,
on not only the
yeah,
technical side of how to operate the robot, what button to push at what time,
yeah,
but also the value of the robots to those in customers. I mean, let's face it,
yeah.
in restaurants,
I
one of
mean,
the
imagine
values is
if
they don't have to
you
split tips
send
with it.
a robot into the customers and then you just see that there's a $20 bill on there. That's gonna be fun. In terms of the cost or the
Yeah,
opportunity cost of
exactly.
just preventing something damaging for the robot, preventive maintenance compared to the cost.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's
Yeah,
I would and
yeah,
in most cases it
yeah,
makes sense to hire someone who is a professional to support the robot. So we provide services to them and
yeah,
then they sell it to the end customer. But it's very
Y-
reasonable. And if you're going to make the investment in a technology like a robot, it makes sense
You know, I'm
to
not sure about
invest
this,
in
but
the
I
support
believe
program
most
to keep it
of
up and running.
the new industries that are just seeing the robots now, maybe the restaurants, because they just introduced the robot to them, and most of their employees are probably not rooting with the robots; they're probably rooting against them because they're scared that they're gonna be replaced. When do you think that could possibly change? Yeah,
Yeah, you're right, and that's a cultural shift that has to happen. Where they see the robot initially as a threat. But and we'll see that, during our, especially when we're working with larger enterprise level customers where, the decision was made up at a corporate level to place, we're going to put robots in all of our restaurants across the country, right? And so that it wasn't like a local decision to get the robots, it came from a higher level. So the robot shows up at the restaurant, this guy shows up, to unpack it and set it up and program it and all those kind of things. So yes, there is generally sometimes an apprehension about what that this is going to do. But I think over time, and it doesn't take usually too long for people to start figuring out, one, it has a positive impact on my pocket, right? Because now I can actually spend more time taking care of my customers and less time running back and forth to the kitchen. So they actually sometimes see their tips go up because they're able to provide a better service to customers. As I mentioned, they're not having to split tips with it, so that's another benefit. Um, and I think you end up with a happier end customer, the guy who's buying the pizza, or whatever it is, that's being delivered by the robot. There's a novelty to it that they enjoy, um, but also making sure that my drink cup stays full because the wait staff's not having to run back and forth to the kitchen all the time. So over time, they quickly realize, and like I said, once they realize they don't have to carry those heavy trays of drinks anymore or those heavy trays of dirty dishes back and forth, people start to realize, hey, this thing actually is helping me. I go in oftentimes to a restaurant. I'll go to a restaurant, even not one that we're necessarily servicing, if I know they have a robot, and I'll watch your pizza, watch the staff, how they interact with it, and then I'll talk to the staff, and just say, "Hey, what do you think of the robot?" And most of the time, I'll hear something very positive about, "Yeah, it's made my life so much easier."
that's
Even
amazing.
though I may not
And
have
since
thought
we're
so in the
nearing the end of
beginning,
the
it's made my
podcast, do you
life
have
easier.
any message to anyone who might be uncertain with the future where humans and robots will coexist on a much daily basis?
I would say,
Yeah,
just don't be afraid. We sometimes we find people are afraid of robots. It's just another technology, right? It's another technology that's meant to help people.
yeah,
Don't be afraid of it any more than you're afraid of your
yeah,
cell phone, right? It's there as a tool. There's so many things that we do today on these mobile devices
yeah.
that we never could do in the past. I don't even know how I got around the world anymore without having navigation on my phone. Back when we had paper maps and things, right?
Yeah,
So, embrace the technology. It's inevitable, you know, and so embrace it. Learn to use it. Learn to, if you're a young person
yeah,
looking
it is.
for an exciting career, robotics is a great one to get into. It's not going anywhere but up. And so, I would say
So,
embrace the technology, embrace the changes. Is it going to bring some disruption? Absolutely. So did
yeah,
the cell phone, so did the internet. But as the society, we adapt to those things. But better to embrace it early,
that's amazing.
and
And
you may
for people who
find
are interested in
a
learning more
great
about
career
you
in
and
it
your
as well.
company, where can they find you?
Sure. Our website is RoboWorks, and that's ROBOWORX .io. And you can always contact me through LinkedIn. or my email, dale@roboworks.io. Um, Feel free to reach out through LinkedIn as well, or email, or through the company website, and we'd be happy to answer questions and talk to anyone about
Yeah.
robots. We're obviously big fan of robots. That's why we're do what we do. So we're always happy to talk about robots. And thank you for taking the time to let me tell our story and what we do and
Well,
how
I
we
might tell
help
you right now, it's a very
support the
exciting field,
adoption
and
of
I'm
robots here in
excited
the
to see
U.S.
where it would lead. And thank you for joining me on the New World Podcast.
Thank you, John.
That's all for today's episode of the New World Podcast. We have explored some fascinating topics with our amazing guests, shedding light on the upcoming new world. If you enjoyed today's episode and today's discussion and want to stay updated on the future episodes, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to the podcast. And if you found value on what we have discussed, please consider leaving us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Remember, if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, or if you are interested in being a guest in the future, please feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn or email me at john.paul@aicinix.com and add New World Podcast, all capital, in the subject line so I can see it. I always love hearing from our listeners. And don't forget to check out our amazing guests. You can find more information about them by the contact details we provided earlier. Again, thank you for tuning in on the New World Podcast. I know your time is very important, and I try to always make the next episode better than the last. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, keep innovating. This is John Paul Flores signing off from the New World Podcast.